Tier 1, Surface Disturbia. Mortal Kombat, 1992, Blood Code Panic. In 1992, arcade cabinets started attracting more kids than ice cream trucks. And the reason? Mortal Kombat. It wasn't just another Street Fighter clone. It had a secret weapon that would change gaming forever. Blood. Buckets of it. Violence in games wasn't new, but Mortal Kombat made it feel real. At least by 90s standards. You could uppercut someone and watch pixelated blood spray like a broken ketchup bottle. But the real controversy came when "Finish him" flashed on screen. Decapitations, heart extractions, spontaneous combustion, executed in glorious, crusty pixel blood. All because the graphics were digitized actors. It all felt just real enough to short-circuit a suburban parent's brain. Parents were horrified, politicians were outraged, and kids, well, the kids couldn't get enough. The controversy reached Congress when Senator Lieberman's pearl-clutching hearings featured Mortal Kombat's greatest hits. Decapitations, heart removals, spine collection, all the classics. Nintendo panicked and released a sanitized version, while Sega just hid the gore behind a cheat code that every kid knew within 24 hours. Guess which version outsold the other by a ridiculous margin? The resulting moral panic birthed the ESRB. So next time you see that M for Mature label, thank Sub-Zero's spine collection hobby. Brazil and Germany led the charge in banning the game outright. The irony? Those bans only increased its mystique, creating a black market that made the forbidden fruit even more desirable. Nothing makes teenagers want something more than adults saying they can't have it. Mortal Kombat's legacy isn't just as a great fighting game. It forced society to take video games seriously, for better or worse. And all it took was a little digital blood. Postal 2, 2003. The game that earned its name. If video games were people, Postal 2 would be that guy at a party, offends everyone on purpose, and then claims he's just being honest. Released in 2023 by Running with Scissors, this game isn't just shocking for shock's sake. It's shocking for shock's sake while giving you a condescending lecture about how you're the real problem for being offended. The premise seems simple enough. You play as the Postal Dude, a regular guy trying to complete mundane tasks like cashing a check or returning a library book. The plot twist? You can complete these tasks peacefully, or you can go on a rampage with weapons ranging from shotguns to cats with silencers strapped to their behinds. Yes, someone designed, programmed, and tested a cat silencer. That was someone's actual job. While the game pretends to give you a choice, everything is designed to push you towards violence. The townsfolk are irritating, lines are long, and everyone seems engineered to test your patience. Postal 2 checks every box on the video game controversy checklist. Public urination? Yep. Animal cruelty? You can use cats as silencers. Mass shootings? Unfortunately. Gary Coleman cameo? Weirdly, also yes. New Zealand banned it so hard, even owning a copy could get you fined. Distribute it, and you're committing a crime, with fines up to $10,000. Australia, Germany, Malaysia, and Sweden quickly followed suit. The German Federal Department for Media Harmful to Young Persons called it a document of a disturbed mind. Running with Scissors probably printed that on t-shirts. The game's creator, Vince Desi, defended it as satire, claiming it exposed society's hypocrisy. That might be more convincing if the satire amounted to more than, what if you could pee on people and then set them on fire? The ESRB gave it an adults-only rating. Not for one specific thing, but for how players could combine mechanics into disturbingly violent outcomes. It wasn't just about what you saw, it was about what the game let you do. They stated that the combinations of gameplay elements could result in unacceptably intense acts of violence, an unusual rationale at the time. In other words, Postal 2 isn't disturbing because of what it shows, it's disturbing because of what it lets you do, and how fast you take the bait, which is an underlying theme in many of these video games. Like this next one, for example. BMX XXX, 2002, when extreme sports got too extreme. In the early 2000s, extreme sports games were printing money. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater dominated sales charts, and everyone wanted a piece of the action. Enter Acclaim Entertainment with a brilliant plan. Combine BMX tricks with adult entertainment. What could possibly go wrong? Everything. Everything could go wrong. BMX XXX was what happened when a failing company tried to combine dirt bikes and desperation. Acclaim's BMX franchise was struggling, so they decided that what bike stunts really needed was nudity and toilet humor. The game featured footage of actual real-life strippers, missions to collect adult materials, and an unsettling amount of uncensored content that makes me feel like I need to wipe my browser history just for researching this. Australia's classification board took one look and said, absolutely not, slapping it with an outright ban. Major retailers like Walmart and Toys R Us refused to stock it. Even the console manufacturers got squeamish. Microsoft and Nintendo banned it from their platforms entirely, while Sony allowed it only with the explicit content censored, which defeated the game's entire selling point. The funny thing, without the controversy, no one would remember this game at all. The actual gameplay was mediocre at best. Critics savaged it, calling it the video game equivalent of a 13-year-old's notebook doodles. The physics were broken, the controls were frustrating, and the humor had all the sophistication of a fart in church. Acclaim was so confident in their adult content sales strategy that they offered to pay the legal fees of any retailer fined for selling the game. But you can't pay legal fees when no one's buying your product. BMX XXX bombed so spectacularly that it helped drive Acclaim into bankruptcy within 2 years. In the end, the game that tried to revolutionize gaming by adding adult content to BMX mostly served as a cautionary tale about mistaking controversy for content. Or, as one reviewer put it, they were so preoccupied whether they could, they didn't stop to think if they should. Manhunt 2003, Murder as Art. After Grand Theft Auto had Fox News anchors foaming at the mouth, Rockstar thought, how can we really give Middle America an aneurysm? The answer was Manhunt, where murder isn't just necessary, it's an art form with its own rating system. The premise is pure grindhouse cinema. You play as James Earl Cash, a death row inmate, who finds himself starring in a snuff film directed by a character voiced by Brian Cox. Your director, Lionel Starkweather, promises freedom if you brutally murder gang members for his camera. Keyword being brutally. Manhunt introduced a system where the longer you stalked your prey, the more savage your kill would be. Hold the button briefly, a quick, efficient death. Hold it longer, you might suffocate someone with a plastic bag while they kick and struggle. The game rewards patience with increasingly grisly animations, all filmed in grainy VHS quality footage, complete with time codes and director's commentary. Beautiful. That'll make the highlight reel for sure, Starkweather might exclaim after you perform particularly creative violence. It's disturbing not just for the violence itself, but for how it makes you complicit in the voyeurism. You're not just killing, you're killing for an audience. It's performance art, where the medium is murder. The controversy exploded when the game got linked to a real-life murder in the UK. A 14-year-old was killed by a 17-year-old friend in a way some said mirrored the game. Later investigations doubted the connection, but by then, the damage was done. The game was pulled from shelves across the UK and banned outright in Australia, New Zealand, Germany, and several other countries. Rockstar co-founder Terry Donovan defended the game, saying, "We believe in freedom of creative expression, just as we believe in the freedom of choice for our consumers." Critics countered that maybe some choices shouldn't be available, like the choice to practice garroting techniques on digital victims. It's like saying we should be able to sell anything and our buyers can do anything with it, because freedom. What makes Manhunt truly disturbing isn't just what it shows, but what it asks of you. It transforms murder from an impulsive act into a deliberate performance, asking you to be patient, careful, and creative in your killing. Manhunt 2, 2007. Double the murder, double the trouble. If Manhunt was Rockstar testing the waters of controversy, Manhunt 2 was a full-blown cannonball. Released in 2007, the sequel took everything disturbing about the original and cranked it up to 11. Because nothing says we've learned our lesson like doubling down on everything that got you in trouble the first time. This time, you play as Daniel Lamp, a mental patient with amnesia who escapes from an asylum during a power outage. Joined by Leo Casper, a mysterious inmate with a penchant for violence, you embark on a journey to recover Daniel's memories and discover the truth behind his imprisonment. As spoiler alert, it involves murder. Shocking, I know. The kills in Manhunt 2 make the original look like a Disney movie. Execution include forcing a victim's head into an electrical box, using a hypodermic needle in truly creative ways, and bashing faces with a toilet lid, all lovingly rendered in graphic detail. And if you're wondering if there's a reason for all of this beyond shock value, the answer is sort of. The game initially received an adults-only rating from the ESRB, which is essentially a commercial death sentence since major retailers and console manufacturers refuse to carry AO-rated games. And ironically, it was sort of counterproductive, as rebellious teenagers were now only drawn toward it more because of the adults-only rating. Nothing makes something more appealing than being told you can't have it. Rockstar, not willing to lose millions in potential sales, made modifications to tone down the violence by adding visual filters that obscured the most graphic moments. Even with these changes, the game was banned in the UK, Ireland, Australia, Saudi Arabia, and several other countries. The New Zealand Office of Film and Literature classification described it as depicting gross, unrelenting, and gratuitous violence. Germany went even further, placing it on their list of media harmful to young people, making it illegal to advertise or display publicly. What's particularly interesting about Manhunt 2 is how it tries to justify its violence through its narrative. The game suggests that Leo might be a figment of Daniel's imagination, a Tyler Durden-esque projection of his darker impulses. The psychological angle could have been fascinating if it wasn't buried under 6 feet of gore. It's like trying to talk about mental health while someone screams obscenities right next to your ear. Tier 2. Deeper Disturbance. Hatred 2015. Testing Steam's limits. In 2015, Polish developer Destructive Creations decided to answer a question nobody was asking. What if we made a game where the only objective is to kill as many innocent people as possible? The result was Hatred, a game so deliberately provocative it seemed designed specifically to cause outrage rather than entertainment. And it delivered. The game casts you as the antagonist, a misanthropic mass murderer with long black hair and a coat that screams, "I have manifestos on my hard drive." His motivation? Pure nihilism. My whole life is just cold, bitter hatred. He monologues in an opening sequence that makes edgy teenager poetry look well-adjusted by comparison. What follows is a mass violence simulator, where you roam suburban streets, office buildings, and other everyday locations, murdering civilians who beg for their lives. Police and SWAT teams try to stop you, but they're just more targets on your way to the ultimate goal, a violent suicide once you've killed enough people. Fun family entertainment, clearly. The marketing was equally subtle. The announcement trailer featured the tagline, "Hatred fills my heart with comfort," and shows the protagonist shooting a wounded woman at point-blank range. It was like the developers sat around brainstorming ways to guarantee headlines and went with all of them. The controversy reached its peak when Steam, the largest digital distribution platform for PC games, removed Hatred from its Greenlight program, where users vote on which games should be sold on the platform. This rare act of content policing by Steam seemed to confirm that the game had indeed crossed a line. But then things got interesting. Gabe Newell, who runs Valve, stepped in personally and brought the game back, telling the developers he was sorry. His take was basically, look, Steam is all about giving creators and players the tools to do their thing. The bottom line was clear. Valve wasn't saying the game was awesome, but they weren't gonna start playing content judge either. Critics universally panned Hatred, not just for its content, but for being a mediocre game. It has clunky controls, repetitive gameplay, and graphics that look like someone applied an edgy filter to a game from 2005. The game's only innovation was in the field of tastelessness. Yet despite, or perhaps because of the controversy, Hatred sold well. It topped the Steam bestseller list on release day, proving once again that there's no such thing as bad publicity. Or as the antagonist might say, the only thing worse than being hated is being ignored. Which is exactly what would have happened to this game without the controversy. Thrill Kill, 1998. The game so nasty was killed before birth. Imagine spending millions of dollars and thousands of hours creating a video game, only to have it completed, ready to ship, and then just buried. That's exactly what happened to Thrill Kill. The fighting game so controversial it was cancelled despite being 100% finished. Developed by Paradox Development for the original PlayStation, Thrill Kill was poised to push the envelope for violence and adult content in gaming. The premise? 8 condemned souls are sent to hell where they compete in a tournament for a chance at reincarnation. Each character was a walking ESRB warning label. There was Belladonna, a dominatrix in bondage gear, Dr. Faustus, a quadruple amputee in a straitjacket who fought with his mechanical limbs. And who could forget Tormentor, a gimp-suited man wielding a cattle prod. I'm guessing the character designer had some interesting browser history. The gameplay wasn't just about depleting your opponent's health bar. Instead, you filled a kill meter by inflicting damage, and once full, you could perform a thrill kill, the game's equivalent of a fatality. These included ripping opponents in half, stomping them into a bloody puddle, or forcing them to literally eat their own heart. All of this played out in cramped arenas designed to keep players in constant contact, creating what the developers called the first 3D adult-oriented fighter. I'm pretty sure that's not a title anyone was competing for. Thrill Kill was set to receive one of the first ever adults-only rating for a console game. Virgin Interactive, the publisher, was ready to accept the limited retail options that came with such a rating, believing the controversy would drive sales. Everything was on track for a Halloween 1998 release. Then Electronic Arts entered the picture like a disapproving parent. EA acquired Virgin Interactive, inheriting Thrill Kill in the process. After reviewing the game, they decided it didn't meet their publishing standards and canceled it weeks before release. In a statement that should be framed in the Museum of Corporate Understatement, EA explained, "It just wasn't appropriate for us to market." Translation, what were they thinking? But in the pre-digital age, a completed game couldn't just disappear. Paradox employees, bitter about their work being suppressed, leaked nearly complete copies onto the internet. Bootleg versions circulated on burned CDs, giving Thrill Kill a second life as forbidden contraband. The developers eventually recycled the game engine to create Wu-Tang, Shaolin style, a fighting game featuring the rap group, a poor consolation prize for what could have been gaming's most notorious title. The Guy Game, 2004. Spring break meets legal problems. The early 2000s were a strange time. Jackass was mainstream entertainment. Girls Gone Wild infomercials played after midnight on basic cable. And somehow, someone thought combining trivia with footage of real college girls exposing themselves was a brilliant concept for a video game. That game was The Guy Game, and it's banned for reasons that should be obvious to anyone with a functioning moral compass. Released for PlayStation 2 and Xbox in 2004, The Guy Game featured footage of real young women exposing themselves during spring break in South Padre Island, Texas. The gameplay was simple. Answer trivia questions correctly, and you'd be rewarded with uncensored footage of intoxicated college students lifting their shirts. Answer incorrectly, and the good stuff stayed pixelated. It was like if Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was hosted by the creepiest guy you knew in college. The game's host, a sleazy character named Matt Sadler, would approach women on the beach, ply them with alcohol, and convince them to participate in a trivia contest where wrong answers meant public exposure. The fact that this predatory behavior was the entire premise should have raised red flags. But somehow it cleared the censors and received an M rating. The early 2000s, everyone. But here's where things went from sleazy to illegal. One of the women featured in the game filed a lawsuit against the developers. Why? Because she was only 17 years old when she was filmed. That's right, The Guy Game, a title marketed as adult entertainment, contained footage of a minor. You could practically hear the lawsuits coming up. A Texas court quickly issued an injunction prohibiting further sales of the game, making it officially banned. Copies were pulled from shelves, but not before thousands had already been sold. Because it included footage of a minor, owning or distributing certain copies could legally qualify as possession of CP in some countries, with serious consequences. Not exactly a collector's item you want to brag about. The Guy Game's developers, top-heavy studios, never recovered from the lawsuit. They shut down shortly after, their legacy a cautionary tale about the dangers of building a business model around exploiting drunk college students. The game's publisher, Gathering of Developers, was absorbed by Take-Two Interactive, who presumably keep the skeleton buried deep in their corporate closet. What's particularly disturbing about The Guy Game isn't just its content, but how many gatekeepers failed to stop it. Everyone, developers, publishers, platforms, even ratings board, looked at a game built around filming drunk women without proper consent and said, yeah, this seems fine. It's a reminder of how different attitudes were just a few console generations ago. Sometimes games are banned for political reasons or moral panic. Sometimes, as in this case, they're banned because they're literal crimes burned onto a disc. Rule of Rose, 2006. How to cancel a game with just rumors. Rule of Rose is the video game equivalent of being convicted in the court of public opinion for crimes you didn't actually commit. Released in Japan and North America in 2006, this psychological horror game never technically made it to Europe because of a controversy based almost entirely on misinformation and moral panic. Set in 1930s England, Rule of Rose follows Jennifer, a young woman trapped in a world controlled by a group of sadistic girls called the Aristocracy of the Red Crayon. The game's aesthetic is reminiscent of a twisted fairy tale, with themes exploring the cruelty children can inflict on each other. Dark? Absolutely. But not in the way European politicians claimed. The trouble began when then-mayor of Rome, Walter Veltroni, denounced the game without having played it, based solely on trailers and secondhand descriptions. He claimed Rule of Rose depicted children being buried alive, newborns being killed, and a girl growing up in a coffin. None of these scenes actually exist in the game. No actual footage, missions, or mechanics supported any of these rumors. Not to be outdone, Franco Frattini, the European Justice Commissioner, wrote to all EU ministers demanding they ban this game he had also never played. He described it as promoting aberrant behaviors toward children, and even called for reforms to the entire European video game rating system, based on his imaginary version of Rule of Rose. Politicians and video games? Name a more iconic duo of mutual misunderstanding. The British tabloids, never one to let facts get in the way of a good moral panic, ran headlines like, "Sick bully computer game vanished," and "The video nasty that encourages children to be cruel." One MP called it a manual for pedophiles. The most ridiculous claim was that the game rewarded players for inappropriate actions involving children, which is completely false. There is no such content in the game at all. What makes this especially absurd is that the Rule of Rose is actually a thoughtful, if disturbing, exploration of childhood trauma. The game's true horror comes from psychological torment and bullying, not graphic violence or inappropriate content. The few violent scenes that do exist are mild compared to countless other games that face no controversy. Publishers Punchline and Sony eventually canceled the European release, not because the game was objectionable, but because defending against the tsunami of misinformation wasn't worth the battle. Rule of Rose became a sacrificial lamb to appease moral guardians who never bothered to check if their outrage was justified, while genuinely problematic games flew under the radar. Today, the game's rarity has made it a collector's item, with copies selling for hundreds of dollars. The irony is palpable. A game banned for its supposedly exploitative content has become valuable precisely because of that ban, ensuring more people seek it out than it would have if politicians had just left it alone. Custer's Revenge, 1982. The Atari's darkest hour. Long before Grand Theft Auto sparked congressional hearings or Mortal Kombat introduced the world to digital decapitations, there was Custer's Revenge. A game so fundamentally vile that it makes modern controversies look tame by comparison. Released for the Atari 2600 in 1982, it holds the dubious distinction of being one of the first video games to generate widespread moral outrage. And yeah, it earned every bit of that outrage. The gameplay, and I use that term loosely, involved controlling a pixelated, naked General Custer with visible arousal as he dodged arrows to reach a Native American woman tied to a post. Upon reaching her, the game rewarded players by allowing Custer to commit what can only be described as digital assault. That's it. That was the whole game. Move right, dodge arrows, commit something completely indefensible. The graphics were primitive even by 1982 standards, with the characters represented by crude stick figures, but the intent was unmistakable, and no amount of pixelation could obscure the depravity of the concept. The game's tagline was, "When you score, which manages to be both incredibly tasteless and painfully unclever. The marketing department really outdid themselves with that one. Custer's Revenge was marketed by Mystique, a company specializing in adult games under their Swedish erotica label. Calling this erotic is like calling a mugging romantic tension. It wasn't just explicit, it combined assault with racist caricatures of Native Americans in a way that seemed designed to offend as many people as possible. The backlash was as swift and severe as it should have been. Women's rights groups, Native American organizations, and anti-pornography activists united in their condemnation. The game was banned in several municipalities, with authorities in Oklahoma City seizing copies from stores. It's one of the first examples of video games being treated as potentially harmful contraband rather than mere entertainment. Atari, which had nothing to do with the game's creation, sued Mystique to distance themselves from the controversy. The company's official statement read in part, "The game is explicit, has no redeeming social value, and may well be illegal. When even the console maker wants nothing to do with your game, you've crossed the line." Several lines, actually. You've crossed so many lines you're basically playing hopscotch with moral boundaries. But once again, despite, or perhaps because of the controversy, Custer's Revenge reportedly sold between 20,000 and 80,000 copies at $50 each, which was overpriced as hell for that time, and disturbingly successful for a game that should have never existed in the first place. Mystique followed it with two more adult-themed games before the video game crash of 1983 put them out of business, proving that there is still some occasional justice in the world. Today, Custer's Revenge is remembered as a low point in video game history, a relic from a time when video games had zero ethical guardrails, and somehow even less shame. Tier 3, The Abyss, 177, 1986, Japan's notorious criminal simulator. In 1986, while Nintendo was bringing joy to American children with Super Mario Bros., Japanese developer DB Soft was creating something far darker for the PC 8801 computer. That game was 177, named after the article of Japan's penal code dealing with crimes we can't explicitly name on YouTube. If that doesn't immediately set off alarm bells, your alarm system might need maintenance. 177 was essentially a text-based adventure game where the goal was to stalk and commit unspeakable crimes against women. Players would follow potential victims, gather information about them, and then attack. The game even featured a planning phase where you would decide the best time and method for your assault. The graphics were primitive by today's standards, with basic 8-bit representations of the scenes described in text. But the content was so unmistakable that even horrible pixels couldn't mask it, making it all the more disturbing that this passed for entertainment. The game featured multiple women to target, each with different routines and characteristics, adding a strategic element that makes you want to throw up. What's particularly disturbing about 177 is that it wasn't created as some underground bootleg title. It was a commercially released product from an established company that also made normal games like baseball simulations. DB Soft even went on to create a sequel of sorts called 177 Part 2, doubling down on the concept. Apparently, one game promoting criminal behavior against women wasn't enough. The game generated significant controversy, even in 1980s Japan, a market generally more permissive of adult content in games. It never received an official Western release, which is probably for the best given the likely reaction. However, in the internet age, nothing truly disappears, and the game has become something of a dark legend in gaming history. JFK Reloaded, 2004. Assassination as Education. Released on November 22, 2004, the 41st anniversary of President Kennedy's assassination, JFK Reloaded might be the only game on this list that claimed to have educational value. The Scottish developers at Traffic Management Limited described it as a historical simulation that would help disprove conspiracy theories by showing the physics of how Lee Harvey Oswald, the shooter, could have acted alone. A noble goal, maybe, if your educational tool wasn't literally putting players in the role of a presidential assassin. That's like teaching fire safety by giving kids matches and gasoline. The gameplay was simple, but disturbing. Players took control of a rifle from the 6th floor of the Texas Schoolbook Depository. The position Oswald allegedly fired from. The goal? Recreate the 3 shots that killed the president as accurately as possible, matching the timing and trajectory of the bullets according to the Warren Commissioner's official report. Points were awarded for historical accuracy, with a perfect score of 1,000 theoretically possible if you precisely matched every detail of the assassination. And just when you thought it couldn't get more messed up, the developers decided to make things even more bizarre by throwing out a $10,000 prize for whoever could rack up the highest score. It was like they looked at this horrific tragedy and thought, what this really needs is a high score screen. The fact that this idea didn't get immediately thrown in the trash is mind-blowing. Seriously, who sits down and thinks, hey, let's turn this terrible moment into some kind of twisted game competition? The Kennedy family was, understandably, outraged. Senator Edward Kennedy called the game despicable. While the game was banned or heavily restricted in several countries, major retailers refused to carry it, forcing traffic to sell it exclusively through their website for $9.99. The developers defended the game with spectacular mental gymnastics. Kirk Ewing, the managing director, insisted we genuinely believe that the only thing we're exploiting is new technology. He compared it to controversial films like JFK or documentaries about the assassination. The critical difference, of course, is that those works didn't put viewers in the active role of assassin or reward them for accuracy. If the game can put us in the shoes of World War II soldiers or medieval knights, why does controlling Oswald feel so fundamentally wrong? The answer lies in recency, specificity, and respect for real tragedy. There's a big moral difference between generic war game and Kennedy headshot simulator. The game is now impossible to purchase legitimately, as Traffic shut down its servers years ago after the controversy proved too damaging. VTech Rampage, 2007, making tragedy a game. As if making a video game out of an assassination wasn't enough, someone thought it would be a good idea to make a video game out of a school tragedy, including kids. Some people really make you wonder if humanity was a mistake. Just 4 days after Sung Hui Cho killed 32 people at Virginia Tech in one of America's deadliest mass shootings, Australian programmer Ryan Lambourne released VTech Rampage, a flash game that let players reenact the tragedy. If you're wondering how someone could create something so insensitive in less than a week, you're asking the right question. The wrong question would be, how could this possibly get worse? Because trust me, it does. VTech Rampage wasn't just tasteless in concept, it was deliberately provocative in execution. Players controlled a character explicitly meant to represent the real shooter, moving through crude pixelated versions of the actual Virginia Tech buildings. The goal? Commit mass violence against as many students and faculty as possible before ending your own life, mirroring the real events in a way that feel like emotional vandalism. But Lamborn wasn't content with mere offense. When criticized, he doubled down, demanding $2,000 in donations to remove the game from his website, and another $1,000 for an apology. When that failed to materialize, he created a sequel called VTech Rampage 2, because apparently being reviled internationally once wasn't enough. The creator claimed the game was social commentary, designed to highlight America's lax gun laws. It seemed so weird to me that the people were being blamed for the shooting rather than the laws that allowed them to happen, he said in an interview. A valid political position, maybe, but one that loses all credibility when expressed through exploiting the deaths of actual people while their families were still in mourning. VTech Rampage was universally condemned and banned from every reputable platform, even in the Wild West days of flash game hosting sites. This was too much. The Anti-Defamation League called it an extremely cruel exploitation of a tragedy, while tech journalist Andy Chalk wrote, "There's a line between commentary and exploitation, and this is way, way over it." Lamborn would later create similar games about other school tragedies, establishing himself as a one-trick pony. He allegedly received death threats for his creations, which he seemed to wear as badges of honor, rather than taking as signs that maybe, just maybe, he should reconsider his approach to game development. Super Columbine Massacre RPG, 2005. School shooting as social commentary. If I had a nickel for every time someone tried to cash in on tragedy in the name of social commentary or artistic expression, I'd have quite a few nickels. Because in 2005, game designer Danny Ladon released what might be the most academically defended, yet universally reviled game in history. Super Columbine Massacre RPG puts players in the roles of Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold as they prepare and carry out the 1999 Columbine high school shooting that left 13 people dead before the shooters took their own lives. Created in RPG Maker, the game features crude 16-bit style graphics, reminiscent of Super Nintendo games, creating a jarring contrast with this horrific subject matter. Players begin in April 20, 1999, in Harris's room, gathering weapons and bombs before heading to the school. Dialogue in the game is taken directly from the shooter's journals and video recordings, lending it a disturbing authenticity despite the primitive presentation. Ladon, who was in high school himself when Columbine happened, claimed the game was meant as a serious examination of the factors that led to the tragedy. Games that genuinely challenge social taboos or confront real cultural issues are nearly non-existent, he wrote. So apparently, he decided the solution was to let players roleplay as mass murderers. What makes this game particularly unsettling is its attempt at psychological depth. Between acts of violence, the game includes flashbacks to the shooter's experiences of bullying and social isolation. After completing the massacre, players guide Harris and Klebold to hell, where they battle demons from the video game Doom, which the real Harris was known to play obsessively. The game was, of course, universally condemned by mainstream media and banned from countless platforms. Ladon received death threats, and a documentary about the game called Playing Columbine was created to explore the controversy. Perhaps most notably, the game was removed from the Slamdance Game Festival despite being a finalist, leading to several other developers withdrawing their games in protest of what they saw as censorship. Despite being officially banned or blocked almost everywhere, the game remains available through unofficial channels. Ladon eventually stopped distributing it himself, but hasn't taken action against those who continue to share it. The game exists in a digital limbo, neither fully erased nor legitimately available. Whether it's a thoughtful exploration of a national tragedy or exploitative trash depends largely on who you ask. But perhaps the most telling critique came from the father of one Columbine victim, who simply said, "It's wrong to market the murder of our children." Sometimes the simplest statements cut through all the academic justifications. Active Shooter, 2018. School tragedy as entertainment. When Russian developer Acid announced Active Shooter in May 2018, they claimed it was meant to be a SWAT simulator, where players could take on the role of either police responding to a school incident or the perpetrator themselves. The game, which was apparently meant to be a legitimate police training tool, let players commit digital violence against school children for entertainment. But it's not the first time, and most certainly not the last when something like this appeared in the gaming industry. The game's trailer didn't help its case, featuring footage of a player stalking school hallways. Attacking students and teachers as an on-screen counter tallied civilians killed and cops killed. Acid's developer, going by the name Revive Games, claimed the shooter role was added because it's just a game, not a simulation, inadvertently undermining their own SWAT simulator defense in record time. The backlash was swift and severe. Thankfully, parents of school shooting victims organized petitions gathering hundreds of thousands of signatures, demanding the game's removal from Steam, Valve's dominant PC gaming platform. Ryan Petty, who lost his daughter in the Parkland shooting just months earlier, called it despicable and horrific. Even Senator Bill Nelson of Florida took to the Senate floor to condemn the game, saying it's inexcusable that Valve Corporation is planning to release a video game that simulates an active shooter situation in a school. Politicians rarely agree on anything, but thankfully, maybe don't sell virtual school shooting simulators is one of those rarer issues. Valve, facing unprecedented pressure, removed the game from Steam before its scheduled June 6 release date. But here's where the story takes an interesting turn. In their investigation, Valve discovered that Revive Games was actually a pseudonym for a developer previously banned from the platform for copyright infringement and review manipulation. The school shooting content wasn't just in poor taste. It was part of a pattern of trolling and rule-breaking behavior. This revelation helped Valve frame their decision as one about developers' behavior rather than content censorship, a distinction that mattered to Valve, a company historically known for being reluctant to police content on their platform. In a statement, they called the developer a troll, with a history of customer abuse, publishing copyrighted material, and user review manipulation, essentially saying we're not banning it because of content, but because you're a jerk. Convenient, but effective. Active Shooter never officially released, though bootleg copies supposedly exist in dark corners of the internet. The developer attempted to release it on a website called Acid Publishing, but payment processors refused to work with them, effectively killing the project. The controversy sparked renewed debate about content moderation in gaming, with Valve eventually updating their policies to allow everything on Steam unless it was illegal or straight-up trolling. This peculiar standard created a situation where simulating a school shooting might be allowed if the developer had a clean history and claimed artistic intent, raising uncomfortable questions about the arbitrary nature of content policies. Muslim Massacre, 2008. Hate as gameplay. In September 2008, a Flash game appeared online with the deliberately provocative title Muslim Massacre, the game of modern religious genocide. Created by a Brisbane-based programmer who calls himself Sigvater, the game's premise was as simple as it was hateful. Players controlled an American soldier parachuting into the Middle East with the explicit goal of killing all Muslims. The game's tagline read, "Take control of the American hero and wipe out the Muslim race with an arsenal of the world's most destructive weapons." If that sentence made you physically ill, congratulations on being a decent human being. If it didn't, please go outside. Take a walk and touch some grass. Then maybe talk to a therapist about why genocide simulators don't bother you. The creator later claimed it was satire intended to criticize American foreign policy, which is like claiming that setting a building on fire is just a metaphor for global warming. The developers of these games seem to have uncanny parallels of defending their sick creations through flipping the script on the very things they depict and encourage. The gameplay was as basic as the premise. Using a top-down perspective reminiscent of classic arcade shooters, players moved through desert environments, gunning down men in turbans and women in burqas, which are the signature pieces of religious clothing for Muslims. Power-ups included bacon and alcohol, chosen specifically because they are prohibited to eat and drink in Islam. Boss battles featured Osama bin Laden, the Islamic prophet, and ultimately, the Islamic god himself, designed specifically to provoke outrage. The game wasn't just Islamophobic, it was deliberately designed to be as offensive as possible to Muslims, incorporating outrageous blasphemy. The reaction was, of course, as furious as you'd imagine. Muslim organizations worldwide condemned the game, with the Muslim Council of Britain calling it glorified violence against Muslims. The Australian government investigated whether it violated hate speech laws. though they ultimately determined it didn't meet the threshold for prosecution, which says more about the limitations of those laws than the content of the game. What's particularly disturbing about Muslim Massacre is the timing of its release, coming just 7 years after 9/11, during a period of heightened Islamophobia and ongoing wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The game didn't exist in a vacuum. It dropped during a time when anti-Muslim hate crimes were spiking, and US foreign policy had already dehumanized entire populations, potentially normalizing and gamifying that hatred, providing a medium for bigots to polish their rage. The developer eventually issued a half-hearted apology and removed the game from his website, stating, "I apologize to those who were genuinely offended by the game, but there were assumptions made about my intentions that were not correct." He claimed he wasn't racist, but merely trying to create something absurd and extreme for the sake of comedy. The old "it's just a joke" defense applied to religious genocide. Hilarious. Muslim Massacre was banned in most regions with hate speech laws, but continued to circulate through file sharing and underground channels. While some defenders attempted to frame the controversy as censorship, the more relevant question might be whether interactive entertainment glorifying religious genocide deserves the protection of free expression in the first place. Demonophobia, 2012. Torture as art. Created by a developer known only as Sabat Satori, this 2D horror game follows Sakuri, a 14-year-old girl trapped in a nightmarish hellscape filled with demons who want nothing more than to torture her in increasingly grotesque ways. What sets Demonophobia apart from other horror games isn't just its content, but its singular focus on the suffering of its protagonist. While games like Resident Evil or Silent Hill use death as punishment for player failure, Demonophobia seems to revel in it, featuring over 100 unique death animations that play out in excruciating detail through pixel art that somehow manages to be more disturbing than realistic graphics. These deaths aren't quick or merciful, no. They involve dismemberment, disembowelment, bone breaking, and other atrocities so disturbing YouTube would break out in hives if I described them in detail. All lovingly animated frame by frame. Imagine being that well-adjusted game developer who was somehow okay with spending months perfecting the physics of a teenage girl's suffering. Think about it. Someone placed every pixel on every one of those frames, never pausing even once for a moment of self-reflection and wondering, what the hell am I doing with my life? What makes this even more troubling is the game's underground distribution. Demonophobia was never submitted to any rating board or official platform. It circulated through file-sharing sites and obscure forums, existing in a regulatory blind spot where normal content standards couldn't touch it. The game's relative obscurity meant it never faced the scrutiny that might have led to formal bans, though it would certainly be refused classification in most countries if submitted. The few gaming outlets that acknowledged Demonophobia's existence described it as the most messed up game you'll ever play, or genuinely traumatizing. Even hardcore horror fans find it crosses a line from frightening to simply sadistic. The game seemed designed not to scare, but to disturb and disgust, using extreme violence against a character as its primary selling point. Defenders of the game, what few exist, point to its surreal, nightmarish atmosphere and psychological horror elements as evidence of artistic intent. They argue its extreme content serves the game's themes about guilt, punishment, and religious horror, though no theme or message justifies such detailed depictions of torture, especially involving a little girl. Special Force, 2003. Terrorism as propaganda. In 2003, while American troops were fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan, Hezbollah's Central Internet Bureau was putting the finishing touches on Special Force, a first-person shooter designed specifically as propaganda and recruitment material for the Lebanese militant group. Yes, you heard that correctly. A designated terrorist organization created its own video game for recruitment purposes, to glorify killing, to desensitize murder, to spark awe in a young audience who'd get inspired to experience the game in real life. You get the gist. Special Forces cast players as Hezbollah fighters, conducting operations against Israeli defense forces based on actual battles that took place during Israel's occupation of southern Lebanon. The game opens with a message stating its purpose is to display the defeat of the Israeli enemy and the victory of the resistance. Very subtle, right? The gameplay itself is primitive by 2003 standards, with crude graphics, clunky controls, and limited features. I mean, it was developed by a terrorist organization after all, what more to expect? But the content is unmistakably political. Players are rewarded for killing Israeli soldiers, with point values assigned to different targets. Between missions, players are treated to actual footage of Hezbollah operations and propaganda videos celebrating attacks on Israeli forces. What makes Special Force particularly disturbing is how it blurs the line between entertainment and indoctrination. The game was sold in Lebanon for about $10, primarily targeting children and teenagers. Mahmoud Raya, a member of Hezbollah who helped produce the game, explicitly stated, Special Force offers a mental and personal training for those who play it, so that they can be ready for defending their land. Special Force was banned in virtually every Western nation under anti-terrorism laws that prohibit distributing materials promoting terrorist organizations. In the United States, even possessing a copy could potentially violate laws against providing material support to designated terrorist groups, making it one of the few video games that might land you on a watch list. Despite these bans, the game sold an estimated 100,000 copies in Lebanon and throughout the Middle East, where it became something of a cultural phenomenon. Its success spawned a sequel in 2007, Special Force 2, which focused on the 2006 Israel-Hezbollah war and featured even more explicit propaganda elements, like real-life footage captured during military operations. Yes, including the live deaths. While games like Call of Duty or Battlefield might be criticized for glorifying war or presenting simplified geopolitical narratives, they're ultimately designed as entertainment. Special Force was explicitly created as a tool for political radicalization and recruitment. Sad Satan, 2015, the deep web's most disturbing game. In June 2015, a YouTube channel called Obscure Horror Corner uploaded footage of what the host claimed was a mysterious game he'd found on the deep web, called Sad Satan. The videos showed a first-person journey through dark, oppressive corridors filled with distorted imagery, unsettling sounds, and occasional glimpses of children. The atmosphere was suffocating, with the player often unable to see more than a few feet ahead in the murky darkness. According to the channel's host, the game had been downloaded from a hidden link on the deep web after being tipped off by a subscriber. The original version allegedly contained CP, which the host claimed to have edited out before posting his gameplay videos. This origin story, combined with the genuinely unsettling nature of the footage, quickly turned Sad Satan into an internet legend. The game spread through the online horror community like wildfire. Horror YouTubers analyze every frame of the footage, finding hidden meanings, obscure references to real-world killers like Charles Manson, and distorted audio clips, including speeches from figures like Jimmy Savile, a British celebrity posthumously revealed to be a predator who harmed children. The censored image supposedly included real-world victims and other disturbing material that shouldn't be in any game, let alone one claiming to be horror. What made Sad Satan particularly disturbing wasn't just its content, but the mystery surrounding it. No one knew who created it or why. Some thought it was a viral art project. Others believed it was a warning about exploitation rings operating on the deep web. Some even suggested it might contain subliminal messaging or hidden malware designed to harm viewers in some way. As the legend grew, someone claiming to have the original version uploaded it to file-sharing sites. Users who downloaded this version discovered it was filled with actual illegal images and contained malware that damaged their computers. This version was quickly identified as fake, created by trolls to capitalize on the game's notoriety. In a twist worthy of an internet mystery, further investigation revealed that the original Sad Satan itself was likely a hoax. Tech-savvy viewers pointed out inconsistencies in the Obscure Horror Corner story, suggesting the game might have been created specifically for the channel, rather than found on the deep web. The channel eventually disappeared, leaving more questions than answers. Whether Sad Satan was real, partially fabricated, or entirely fake, its impact was very real. It spawned numerous clean versions created by fans who were intrigued by the concept, but wanted nothing to do with the illegal content allegedly contained in the original. These sanitized versions removed any potentially illegal imagery while preserving the game's oppressive atmosphere and creepy sound design. Sad Satan represents a new kind of banned game, one that exists on the boundaries between urban legend, viral marketing, and actual criminal content. Its distribution through unofficial channels and association with the deep web placed it beyond the reach of traditional regulation, creating a disturbing precedent for how truly harmful content might spread under the guise of horror gaming. But the real horror wasn't the game. It was how easily the internet turned a rumor into reality, complete with victims, clones, and collateral damage. Our Word Play, 2006, Japan's most notorious game. This game didn't just cross a line. It ignored the idea that one should exist at all. In 2006, Japanese developer Illusion released what would become one of the most universally condemned video games in history. The game's title literally tells you what it's about. A 3D simulation where players commit unspeakable acts against a mother and her two daughters. One still in junior high school. I'd spell it out, but then this video would vanish faster than my faith in humanity while researching this content. The gameplay, if we can call it that, begins with the main character targeting a woman on a train. After being caught and released due to the victim not pressing charges, he then exacts revenge by pursuing her family members. The game features a free roam mode, where players can continue their disgusting behavior in various locations and scenarios. It's as if someone looked at the worst aspects of humanity and thought, how can we make this as realistic as possible? What makes this title particularly disturbing isn't just its premise, but the level of detail invested in its mechanics. The game includes a schedule tracking system for following its victims, realistic physics for clothing, and various game over scenarios if the player fails to prevent victims from escaping or calling for help. It's clear that significant development resources went into creating what is essentially a crime simulator, minus the consequences. Initially, this game was only released in Japan, where adult game regulations were loose enough to let something like this sneak through. However, the internet being, well, the internet, the game eventually found its way to international audiences through imports and piracy. In 2009, it came to international attention when Amazon accidentally sold a few copies through its third-party marketplace before quickly removing it. The global outcry was as immediate as it was overwhelming. Women's rights groups, lawmakers, and media outlets around the world immediately condemned it, and rightfully so. Keith Voss, a British MP, raised the issue in Parliament, while CNN ran a feature story on the game's disturbing content. International pressure became so intense that it led to actual policy changes in Japan. The backlash was strong enough that Japan's Adult Game Rating Board rewrote its guidelines to restrict games depicting such violence. Illusion removed the game from their catalog, and it was effectively banned worldwide, including its country of origin. What's particularly troubling is that this wasn't created by some fringe underground developer, but by an established company with multiple commercial releases. Illusion had previously created relatively mainstream adult games, suggesting there was a market large enough to justify the considerable development costs of a 3D game with detailed physics systems. The game remains the most infamous example of a niche genre of Japanese adult games called eroge, that sometimes incorporate non-consensual themes. While most eroge games involve consensual relationships or fantasy scenarios, titles like this crossed a line that prompted international intervention and industry self-regulation. Battle R Worder, 2002, gamifying assault. Before that game shocked the world, there was an even earlier atrocity called Battle R-Word, a 2002 fighting game from, surprise, surprise, the same developer, Illusion. Apparently, they found their niche creating garbage that makes you want to power wash your brain. Their business model? Combining two things that should never share the same hard drive. The gameplay is split into two distinct phases. First, players engage in relatively standard one-on-one fights against female opponents using a simple combat system. After defeating an opponent, the game transitions to its second phase, euphemistically named Pleasure Mode, which somehow makes it worse, where the player can assault the now defenseless character. The game attempts to frame this as somehow consensual, despite the title and premise explicitly stating otherwise. What makes Battle R Worder particularly disturbing is how it repackages assault as a game mechanic, and then calls it a reward. The fighting portion is merely a pretext, a thin veneer of legitimate gameplay layered over the real purpose of the software. By structuring the assault as a reward for victory, the game frames it as something earned or deserved, a horrifying perspective by any standard. Battle R Worder never received official distribution outside Japan, effectively banned by the content standards of every major market. Even in Japan, it existed in a regulatory gray area, sold only in adult shops with age verification. However, bootleg copies obviously circulated internationally, and circulated on file-sharing networks, quietly reaching international players despite official restrictions. The game spawned a sequel in 2005, Battle R Worder 2, which attempted to soften its image by making the inappropriate content technically consensual, though the title and marketing still leaned hard into the exact themes they were supposedly walking back. The developers seemed to recognize they had crossed the line, but were unwilling to abandon the problematic branding that had garnered attention. Sociolotron, 2005, when virtual assault becomes all too real. Just when you thought things couldn't get worse, someone booted up Sociolotron. Brace yourselves as we plunge deeper into the abyss with a game that blurred the lines between virtual depravity and actual harm to real people. Most controversial games exist in a single-player bubble, where disturbing actions affect only digital characters with no real humans involved. Sociolotron shattered that barrier by bringing deeply troubling content into a multiplayer environment, creating a virtual world where players could commit acts against other players without their consent. Yeah, the kind of acts we can't describe without getting banned. It wasn't just a game about inappropriate behavior. It enabled a form of digital violation. Launched in 2005 by independent developer Sociolotronics LLC, Sociolotron billed itself as an adult MMORPG with unprecedented freedom. While most MMOs restrict player behavior to maintain a pleasant environment, Sociolotron went in the opposite direction, allowing almost any behavior, no matter how disturbing. Players could engage in virtual intimate activities, which alone wouldn't be controversial, but the game also permitted non-consensual interactions, including violations, torture, and slavery. What made this particularly problematic was the lack of meaningful consent mechanisms. In most adult multiplayer games, intimate interactions require all parties to agree. In Sociolotron, players could force these interactions on unwilling participants through in-game mechanics like character restraints and combat. The victim player would be forced to watch their character being violated, with no way to disconnect or escape until the action was complete, taking the concept of harm to a whole never-before-seen level of psychological, rather than physical victimization. There's bleak, and then there's building mechanics to simulate this kind of thing. Even more disturbing were the permanent consequences. Characters subjected to violence in Sociolotron could contract diseases, become pregnant, or suffer permanent injuries that affected their abilities. This meant that even after the immediate assault ended, victims would continue experiencing negative effects from something they never consented to, creating a form of ongoing virtual trauma. The game's creator, Thomas Menton, defended these mechanics as being about freedom and realism, arguing that players knew what they were getting into. That's like saying you should have known better, which ignores the entire concept of consent. There's a difference between choosing to explore dark themes and having them forced on you by another person in real time. Sociolotron was never officially banned by government action, but it faced a different kind of censorship. Payment processors refused to work with the game. Hosting companies terminated their services, and advertising platforms blocked their content. This commercial ostracism effectively relegated the game to the margins of the internet, where it maintained a small but dedicated player base. The game raised profound questions about the limits of consent in virtual spaces. If someone's digital avatar is violated without their permission, has a form of harm occurred. While obviously not equivalent to physical assault, the emotional impact could still be significant, especially in a game designed to be immersive and realistic. What makes Sociolotron different from other games on this list is that the harm wasn't purely hypothetical or limited to desensitization concerns. Real players were forced to watch their avatars violated in ways they didn't consent to, forced to watch acts they found disturbing or traumatic. The game normalized and gamified violence not against NPCs, but against avatars controlled by actual humans, crossing a line that even most controversial games wouldn't approach. Sociolotron eventually shut down after years of struggling to maintain servers and attract new players. Its demise hastened by its inability to secure mainstream business partnerships. Its legacy lives on primarily in academic discussions about ethics in virtual worlds and the evolving understanding of consent in digital spaces. White Law, 2003, the Nazi propaganda shooter. Released in 2003, White Law cast players as either a skinhead or a Klansman, on a mission to take back an American city from racial minorities and Jewish people. The premise centers around the white nationalist fantasy of white genocide, claiming that white people must use violence to prevent their replacement by other racial groups. It's not just a game with racist elements, it's a recruitment tool, designed to normalize and encourage real-world hate crimes. The gameplay itself is primitive. Imagine if Doom was made by someone whose brain was 90% hate speech and 10% programming knowledge. The graphics look like they were rendered on a toaster, and the devs had the ethics of a trash fire. But the content leaves no doubt about its intentions. Enemies are depicted as racial stereotypes of Black, Latino, and Jewish people, complete with exaggerated physical features straight out of Nazi propaganda posters. Ugly, deliberate, and designed to dehumanize. Wall graffitis and in-game messages contain explicit white supremacist slogans and calls for racial violence. Between levels, players get hit with educational speeches from actual neo-Nazis. These segments frame the game's violence as not just fun, but necessary for racial survival, attempting to radicalize players through a combination of gameplay rewards and propaganda. It's like a digital Klan rally disguised as a video game. White law is illegal to distribute or possess in many countries with hate speech laws, including Germany, France, and Canada. In the United States, while not technically illegal under First Amendment protections, the game is classified as hate speech by most platforms and retailers, making it effectively banned from legitimate channels. What makes white law particularly disturbing is its intended audience. While most edgy games claim to target adults, white law was aimed directly at teens and young adults by white supremacist organizations as a recruitment tool. The National Alliance explicitly stated that gaming was a way to reach younger potential converts to their ideology. The game's developers weren't rogue programmers or edgy artists testing boundaries. They were members of an organization classified as a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center and the Anti-Defamation League. White law is one of the clearest examples of a game that deserves to be banned, not because it's offensive or controversial, but because it exists specifically to encourage harm against real people based on their race, religion, or ethnicity. The game remains available only through white supremacist networks and file-sharing sites frequented by extremists. Its legacy is a disturbing reminder that interactive media can be weaponized for propaganda purposes, and that some content restrictions serve a legitimate purpose in preventing the spread of dangerous ideologies. Zog's Nightmare, 2006, anti-Semitic conspiracy game. Just when you thought we'd reached the bottom of the racist game barrel, we encounter Zog's Nightmare, a 2006 release that makes even white law look subtle by comparison. Created by members of the neo-Nazi group National Alliance, this game takes its title from the anti-Semitic acronym ZOG, which stands for Zionist Occupied Government, a conspiracy theory claiming the Jewish people secretly control world governments. The game casts players as a skinhead fighting against a Jewish-controlled dystopia. The enemies include caricatures of Jewish people with exaggerated features that could have been lifted directly from 1930s Nazi propaganda, along with minorities and race traitors. The goal? To overthrow the supposed Jewish control of society through violence. What makes Zog's Nightmare particularly disturbing is its attempt to frame genocide as self-defense. Throughout the game, text and audio claim that white people are victims of a global conspiracy, and that violence against Jewish people and minorities is necessary for survival. This inverted victimhood narrative is a common recruitment tactic for hate groups, and Zog's Nightmare weaponizes it in interactive form. With an uncanny resemblance to white law, the gameplay consists of basic first-person shooting with primitive graphics, suggesting that the developers were more concerned with spreading their message than creating an engaging experience. And just like in white law, between levels, players are subjected to educational segments, featuring real speeches from prominent white supremacists and neo-Nazis, turning the game into a delivery system for extremist propaganda. Seems like one of the two games more certainly took inspiration from the other. Zog's Nightmare is illegal in many countries with hate speech laws. In Germany, where any expression of hatred against the Jewish people is already a sensitive issue because of the Holocaust, possession of the game could result in criminal charges. Even in the United States, with its broader free speech protections, the game is classified as hate speech by platforms and retailers, effectively banning it from legitimate distribution channels. National Alliance made no secret of their intentions with Zog's Nightmare. In internal documents later made public, they described games as a recruitment tool to reach young white men with racial truth in an engaging format. They saw gaming not as an art form or entertainment, but as a propaganda delivery system for their ideology, one that could bypass normal resistance to extremist messages. The game found distribution primarily through white nationalist websites and forums, creating a pipeline where curious players might download it for shock value or thrill, only to be exposed to escalating anti-Semitic and racist content. This approach to radicalization through entertainment represents one of the most cynical and dangerous uses of interactive media. Tier 4. The Darkest Depths. Ethnic Cleansing. 2002. Gaming's white supremacist nadir. You thought those Nazi propaganda games were bad? We're about to witness gaming's absolute moral rock bottom. In 2002, the neo-Nazi organization National Alliance released what might be the most unambiguously evil video game ever created. Ethnic cleansing is exactly what its title suggests. A first-person shooter where players control a white supremacist character on a mission to murder Black, Hispanic, and Jewish people. The premise doesn't even try to hide it. It's basically white law, but louder and more disgusting. The game uses racist caricatures of Black, Hispanic, and Jewish people with things like monkeys, slurs, and cartoonish stereotypes. What makes ethnic cleansing particularly disturbing is the timing of its release. It was deliberately launched on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, as a deliberate insult to the civil rights leader's legacy. This wasn't just a game with racist elements, it was explicitly designed as a digital hate crime, with the developers openly stating their white nationalist goals. And the group behind it wasn't just some internet trolls, it was the National Alliance, a legit white supremacist org with publishing arms and thousands of members. Their leader, William Luther Pierce, wrote the Turner Diaries, a novel that inspired multiple terrorist attacks, including the Oklahoma City bombing. Ethnic cleansing was created as a recruitment tool for their ideology, targeting young men through gaming. The few people who have played it describe an experience that's as boring as it is hateful. The level design is basic, the mechanics clunky, and the entire experience lasts less than an hour, yet its impact far exceeds its quality. A reminder that interactive media can be weaponized for hatred just as easily as books or films. KZ Rattenjagd, 1990s, the Holocaust game. And if you've had enough of racist propaganda, I'll need to hold your hand as we descend even further. There's more coming. A lot more incoming. Deep in the darkest corner of gaming history lies KZ Rattenjagd, with Rattenjagd literally German for rat hunt, a title so vile that most gaming historians are reluctant to even acknowledge its existence. Created in the 90s by actual neo-Nazi groups in Germany, the title translates to Concentration Camp Rat Hunt, with rats being an anti-Semitic reference to Jewish people. The gameplay, if we can even call it that, involves controlling a Nazi officer hunting Jewish prisoners depicted as rats, with the setting unmistakably modeled after a concentration camp. Players are rewarded for killing as many rats as possible, with point multipliers for capturing them in groups. The game includes crude representations of gas chambers and other instruments of Holocaust atrocities. It wasn't just offensive, it was genocide, gamified. What makes KZ Rattenjagd particularly disturbing is its origin within Germany itself, a country that has worked diligently to confront and atone for its Nazi past. The game was created specifically to circumvent Germany's strict laws against Nazi symbolism and Holocaust denial, using the thin disguise of rats instead of human figures to technically skirt legal boundaries while still conveying its hateful message. KZ Rattenjagd is illegal in Germany, under laws prohibiting the glorification of Nazi crimes and incitement to hatred. Possession of the game can result in criminal charges and some well-deserved jail time. It's similarly outlawed in Austria, France, and of course Israel, and other countries with hate speech legislation. The game circulated primarily through neo-Nazi networks on early internet bulletin boards and floppy disks passed hand-to-hand at extremist gatherings. Its graphics were primitive, even by 1990 standards, because it was obviously created more as a propaganda tool, and not a serious attempt at game development. The creators remained anonymous, likely aware of the criminal consequences they would face if identified, but without enough human decency to have realized the sheer weight of their doings. And no, this isn't as worse as it gets. KZ Manager, 1990s, the digital Holocaust simulator. You might think we've reached the absolute pit of human depravity, but apparently there's a sub-basement. Welcome to perhaps the most morally bankrupt software ever conceived. In the pantheon of reprehensible video games, KZ Manager stands alone as perhaps the most morally repugnant software ever created. Made by neo-Nazis in the 90s, because apparently one Holocaust game wasn't enough, this game cast players as the administrator of a Nazi concentration camp, with the explicit goal of killing as many Jewish prisoners as possible while maximizing profit. It's not just offensive. It's a deliberate attempt to gamify one of history's greatest atrocities. The title itself is a grotesque abbreviation, with KZ standing for Konzentrationslager, the German term for concentration camp. The gameplay requires players to purchase Jewish prisoners, assign them to work details, extract gold from their teeth, and eventually murder them in gas chambers. Players are rewarded for efficiency in extermination while balancing resource management. Someone literally looked at the Holocaust and thought, what if this was a business sim? What makes KZ Manager particularly disturbing is its presentation of genocide as not just acceptable, but profitable. The game frames the Holocaust not as a moral horror, but as a business venture, with Jewish lives valued only for the resources they can produce. The Turner Diaries game, Unreleased, the terrorist training manual. In the early 2000s, the same neo-Nazi organization behind ethnic cleansing, white law, and Zog's Nightmare announced plans to create perhaps their most dangerous title yet, a game based on the Turner Diaries, the notorious white supremacist novel that has inspired multiple terrorist attacks, including the Oklahoma City bombing that killed 168 people. For those lucky enough to have never heard of it, the Turner Diaries depicts a fictional race war that leads to a global genocide, with graphic scenes of mass violence against Jewish people, black people, and pretty much anyone the book deems a race traitor. Written by the National Alliance founder William Luther Pierce under the pseudonym Andrew MacDonald, it is both an apocalyptic fiction and an instruction manual for terrorism. Timothy McVeigh had pages from the book when he was arrested for the Oklahoma City bombing. The planned game would have allowed players to take the role of the book's protagonist, Earl Turner, as he carries out terrorist attacks against the system, including the bombing of FBI headquarters, a direct parallel to the Oklahoma City attack. Players would recruit followers, build bombs, and eventually participate in mass executions of minorities, all framed as steps towards building a so-called white homeland. While no complete version of the Turner Diaries game has ever been confirmed to exist, the National Alliance publicly announced their development plans, and evidence suggests that at least preliminary work began before the organization's collapse following Pierce's death in 2002. Some reports indicate that portions of the game may have been integrated into later titles like Zog's Nightmare. What makes the idea of this game uniquely dangerous is how it could have had not-so-nice real-life consequences. Unlike most violent games that feature fictional or historical scenarios, the Turner Diaries explicitly provides tactical information about terrorist techniques. A game adaptation would have turned these instructions into interactive tutorials, basically turning it into a terrorism tutorial disguised as a game. The planned game highlights a disturbing pattern in neo-Nazi game development. Each title became progressively more explicit in connecting virtual violence to real-world action. Ethnic cleansing presented racist violence as entertainment. White law framed it as necessary self-defense. The Turner Diaries game would have closed the loop by turning ideology into step-by-step instructions. The Turner Diaries game represents perhaps the clearest case for content restrictions in interactive media. While debates about violence in mainstream games often center on fictional harm, this title was explicitly designed to encourage and facilitate real-world terrorism against specific groups. It crosses the line from controversial expression to incitement to violence. The fact that even the announcement of such a game generated little mainstream attention speaks to the isolated nature of extremist game development. Whether the game fell apart due to legal risk, technical hurdles, or just the collapse of the National Alliance remains unclear. But its very conception stands as a disturbing reminder of how interactive media can be perverted to serve hateful ideologies, and why certain content restrictions serve a legitimate purpose in preventing harm. If you enjoyed this deep dive into gaming's darkest corners, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. Want more disturbing icebergs? Drop a comment below and let me know what I should take a deep dive into next.